How's it going, you guys? It's Scott with Everyday Home Repairs, and I want to walk you through the complete process to rebuilding a deck. Now, this is a classic DIY project and very rewarding because you see such a massive transformation in your own home. And because each of our projects is a little different, you can look at the bottom of the video in the timeline and you'll see I broke this project up into chapters so you can jump around to get the chapter you need to keep progressing with your own project. So let's jump into it and I'll show you what this deck looked like at the start, and we'll start ripping out those old deck boards. Now, when it comes to getting rid of your material, right? You're removing all this material, it's piling up in your yard. Now, I'm gonna show you what I do, which is take it to the local transfer station. But for you, you might not have a pickup truck and you might not have a trailer, so it's just a huge burden. Two different things that I do is I look in my local area and I look for a metal scrapper. These are the guys usually with a beat up truck going around picking up appliances and bikes and fence posts, piling in the back of the truck and then taking that to your recycling center and then get some money for that scrap material. So those guys will also haul junk for you usually and for a pretty reasonable cost. Now I've used some of those guys for years and years and years and it really helps out on some of the projects. Alternatively, you might also look for a junk removal business. Now I'm usually not looking for national chains here. I don't want to pay that pricing. What I'm looking for is the one-man band or chuck in a truck running around and doing junk hauling or rehab cleanouts or demo as their major business. Again, those guys can be reasonably priced and help get all the old material off your job site so you can start rebuilding the deck. Now, if you do have a truck and you want to do a transfer station, but you're not totally aware of that process, let me show you an example of me taking some of these old deck boards to our local transfer station. Usually with the transfer station, you do something like this, pull up on a scale, stop, wait for that beep, and then you can proceed. That's the scale house telling you, hey, we got your weight, go ahead and drop off your material. And then after you drop off the material, so you get everything out of your bed, you will go back through the scale, weigh again, wait for the beep, and then go in and pay. This way, there's usually some type of max, like a 1 ton for a pickup load. They want to make sure you're not going over that maximum weight. For instance, on this load, I think I was like 11 or 1,200 pounds, so I was well under the 1 ton max for this transfer station. Each one's going to be different, so maybe call your local transfer station. So you just back up to the pile like this and start chucking. Back from the transfer station, you can see I got quite a bit more of the decking removed before leaving than what you saw earlier in the video. All right, so go ahead and power through the rest of this decking, not too much left. And you'll see my rhythm is kind of working at ground level for a few rows of decking and then going up on top and just alternating back and forth, which I feel kind of makes me less tired and easier just to power through the whole project. If you guys have some tips or if you have some questions, jump down in the comments and that is the best place to engage. And I'm always in there on a daily basis interacting with viewers. And just finishing up getting the structure to where we need it on our deck project. We're going to go through all the different things that we need to replace or improve on the old structure. So what could we keep? What do we need to replace to make sure the structure underneath our new decking is ready for the second life and having no issues? So let's start off by jumping into the nails and screws that we used, and then we'll go kind of component by component on the structure and show you what we needed to replace. So when it came to nails, really the only ones that I used were these 10Ds, and that was just to toenail. So any of the toenailing that I needed to do between the beam and the joist. And then these 1.5 inches for any of the joists, the hangers that we needed to address. And then these old lags, these were used to attach the ledger to the house, and then also the beam to the 4x4. So whenever we could, just reuse those and just tighten those up. Now going into other screws, some decking screws and also structural screws, we use these SPAC screws. I think that's how you pronounce it. These 3.5s, and I use these for attaching the rim joist to the joist. You'll see that here later on. I really like these screws in terms of their bite. You can kind of see they have on the threads kind of a fairly aggressive bite and a wave pattern to them. So they're really good for biting in and pulling boards together. These deck screws here I just used for all the blocking, so putting that blocking in. I use these for non-structural components where I just needed to space something and attach it. Those were really aggressive, easy to set and drive in, but the threads are not nearly they didn't have nearly the bite of these SPACs. So prefer these whenever I really need to pull something together, have some additional strength, but these for the blocking. And that just uses a standard T20 bit. Non-composite shims. So I did have to do some shimming between the beam and the joist. And then for anything where I needed to have a true structural screw, I use these SPACs, which are awesome. These are what a lot of guys are switching to instead of the lags. And it kind of has this wide face that is both the head and then also a washer. All right, so you can see that we had to do the rim joist all the way around new. This end rim joist is right at 24 foot wide. I was able to get a 24 foot long 2x10 delivered from our local big box hardware store, which was great because before this was actually 3 pieces and I was able to bring it into 1 piece, which I feel much better about. Also, this corner was unlevel, and that was because before we had the downspout was draining right on the 4x4 post for years and years. So that was giving us issues. So I did have to dig out this corner. This was maybe one of the longer parts of the project. So I dug out the corner post here below our frost line in central Illinois, so we have to go down quite a ways. I went down 36 inches, put a gravel base in, and then put a 10-inch tube and then sucked the 4x4 post. So additionally, I obviously swapped out a few of these joists, and then I just put 3 of the SPAC screws, the structural screws in the end here. Again, this isn't really carrying that much load because you have the beam right there, which is going to carry most of the weight in conjunction with your ledger board. This deck's overall 14 foot wide, so it's a big deck. And then to keep a consistent spacing, I did alternate the blocking between the joists. Now stepping up and looking at the ledger board, it was in pretty good shape. The thing that I don't like about the ledger board, and I'm not a pro, but I think this is fairly common in my area, is this is not correct. So technically you're supposed to take your vinyl siding and cut it, so then you can put flashing up under and flashing over your ledger board, and then that's going to be a better overall solution for shedding water off. Here, water can come down my vinyl and sit on the back side of my ledger board and really have a hard time drying out. So I was somewhat worried about that. I did check on the inside of the home looking for the lags that came through and didn't see any water damage. And overall, this ledger board's in really good condition and it's been here for, I'd say, probably about 10 years. So I kept it that way, and then just where I thought it needed a little bit more support, I put those heavier SPAC structural screws for additional support. I will have steps coming out this end and then down on the far end as well. So I did double up here on the joist for the rim joist, and then I might put some additional blocking in as well, knowing that I'll have some steps coming off, and it'll be nice to have a strong connection here to attach to. This corner, I use the SPAC structural. I'd like to have a little better solution here, but that was the best that I could do for the time being connection. This is infinitely better than the last one. I can show a picture here where it really only had 2 screws holding it in, and it was not doubled up. It's only a single rim joist. On some of these joists, to get them flush here with the joist coming into this outer rim joist, I did have to use those non-composite shims in some points. Pressure treated wood's great, but it's notoriously inconsistent. So I was trying to match older joists to newer joists, and that was about a 1/4 inch different. So we went through, finished everything off, and in this video I want to show you how to place these deck boards using a camo screw system, which is really nice and makes for a nice finish on the top. And also at the end I will break down all the costs for you so you know what would this project cost me if I did it, compared to maybe you have a quote from a professional or two. So you're really comparing, is this worth my time? Is this something that I'm going to save quite a bit of money? So stick with me and let's jump into what tools you're going to need. Obviously, tape measure you're going to need. And then I do have this Wood Life Preserve. Any of these pressure treated boards that you're going to cut and expose a new fresh end, it's good to treat that end with this, this preserve. So I just have that little pail with the brush here for anything that I'm going to cut. Now in terms of fasteners, I'm using the camo system, and I'm using the 2 3/8 screws. And also I'm using the tool which has the 1/16 gap opposed to the 3/16 gap. Because the pressure treated use 3/16, it's going to shrink as it dries, and I don't like how large of a gap that would be. So the 1/16 is my recommendation. 2 3/8, this is an 1.25 inch board. I'm taking the longer screws because the structure, a lot of the joists are old, so I want a little bit more of the screws sinking into those joists because they're not brand new. Then I just have a Makita compact nut driver, obviously an extra battery, and then something that's super handy, especially when you're dealing with 24-foot long deck boards, is one of these bow wrenches, which will help you as you fasten one end. You're going to see some of the boards will bow out. So this helps you bring that board in and gives you the leverage you need so you can fasten it with that 1/16 of a gap between each of the boards that you're looking for. Okay, so checking the measurements, I'm just laying my tape out and butting it up against the vinyl on the one end, and then measuring out to the end of my rim joist, which is 167.5, but then I'm going to add a 1-inch overhang. So what I'm dealing with is 168.5 inches is the distance that I need to cover with boards. So looking at the math, so there's my distance I need to cover with boards. The boards are 5 3/8 or 5.375 plus 1/16 of an inch for a gap between each board. So that's 0.063. So overall for each board I'm going to get 5.438 is the overall distance with the board and the gap. If I take the 168.5 divided by 5.438, I get 30.98 boards. So 30.98, or right at 31 boards, is going to cover this for me. And that is with a 1-inch gap. That's great. So what I wouldn't want to see here is 30.1, 30.2, because what that means is when you get down here, your last board's going to go like right to here or right to here, and you're only going to have like 1 inch, and that's not enough meat in a board to sink the screws and make it secure. So you just want to make sure you don't have a small inch or 1.5 inches here, that you're going to have a sizable board where you can actually secure it. So for my project, it looks good to go, and I should have almost actually a whole board. I might not actually have to rip down the last board, but we'll have to see once everything's in place. Starting to place the deck boards, I will start on the house side, and taking the second deck board off after all of them are laid out, I'm just marking the joist. And this is because the camo jig cannot fit on that first board because of the house. So you got to take the board out of place, and you'll just sink the outside screw and just start it. Then once you have all of the screws in place and started, then you'll put that deck board in its position and start to sink the screws into the joist. Now, a very common part of this deck is going to be needing a bow wrench, because you'll start to see bows in the deck board. I'll go into more detail later on how to use the bow wrench and why it is so handy to have. This is more the normal setup for the camo jig. You're going to place screws in both sides and you'll sink those in. The nice thing is that drill bit has a stop on it, so you cannot drill them too far. It'll actually stop you. Now once you have that first board set in place, now you're just going to kind of get into a rhythm and you're going to get off to the races. If this video is helping you guys out, really appreciate you smashing that like button. We're about halfway through the project, and I just wanted to give you a quick review of especially the camo system. So the camo screws and then the jig here that aligns both those screws. Overall, it's working great. I probably put in, I'd say, about 350 screws so far, and really only had 2 defects, 2 screws that were not usable. I don't really even use this release mechanism. I just set it on top, apply a little pressure, and then sink both the screws. So the camo system, still highly recommend, and I really like the finish and the way that you don't have your screws of varying depths in the top that actually come in the sides of the board. The bow wrench. I know on my first deck project, I did not know of these. They're critical, especially when you're dealing with long, like 14, 16, or ones like these, 24 footers. You're going to need some leverage to straighten out the pressure treated boards so you can maintain that distance. 1/16 is what this Marksman Pro jig from Camo will provide, but really I just try to butt it up because I know that these will dry out over time and they will form some gaps between the boards. So here's an example of a board that's actually already secured at both ends and has quite the bow in the middle. So a la needing a bow wrench to get that to that spacing of 1/16 or butt it up. So you just use the joists and offset that. The nice thing is the camo jig actually fits on the same joists as well if you set your bow wrench correctly. So you just keep that pressure applied, or you keep it over center on the bow wrench and it'll stay in place, and then you just sink your screws, and then you'll have your board in place without a big gap. So I'll continue on, and this is one of those classic projects where you go longer than the weekend, right? So I need to take a few hours each night and finish off the rest of these boards. But everything goes smoothly through the rest of the project. Now at my last board, there was an issue that I'll kind of go over there at the end to show you guys what it ended up looking like. So now we'll move on to cutting each side. So with all these boards of varying lengths, what I'm going to do is use a trim nail, a larger trim nail, and I'm going to poke it up through the deck, between the deck boards, every about 3.5 foot, because I got a 4-foot straight edge, and that's what I'm going to use to mark a straight line all the way down that it's at the correct offset. Taking that trim nail, poking that up through, just making sure it's within the length of my straight edge so I can go from section to section, and then offsetting and taking a 1.5 inch measurement because I want a 1.5 inch overhang, and that is where my line will be made. Then taking that straight line and using a circular saw. I'm not using a guide. If you're not comfortable with just freehanding this and following that line and taking your time, you could install a 2x4 or some other straight edge and then just run your circular saw along that straight edge. Then don't forget, when you cut an exposed end of each of these pressure treated boards, you want to treat those with the Wood Life preservative. So far, I'm really happy with the end product. These long 24-footers stretch the whole way without having to butt 2 different deck boards together. The only thing that I kind of screwed up on is I did measure at the start, making sure that I would have enough board at the end to have an overhang, and it would be wide enough that I'd have to rip it and be wide enough to actually have some surface to screw into, like 2 inches or 2.5 inches. That wasn't the case. So by the time I got all my boards stretched out, which was 30 boards to stretch this full length, it actually has exposed the rim joist. So As it stands right now, I have about an inch or 3/4 of an inch of rim joist exposed, opposed to an overlap, which I wanted 1.5 inches. So this deck is a monster. It's pretty big. It's 336 total square feet. So that is a big deck, at least from what I'm used to. The total cost for like screws and hardware, I spent $100. The camo screws themselves to secure the deck boards and the actual jig or tool to put those in, $150 all in. Post repair, you saw that I had to do the post repair on part 2 of this series, and that cost me $50 in overall cost. The disposal from part 1 of the series was $175, so rolling that in. Wood, so wood's obviously the big component of the cost. So for the deck boards and also the structure, the rim joist and the additional joist that I got, that was $1,700, so $1,700. And then some shipping costs on that was about $100, because these were monsters, and I do have a truck, but I wasn't going to try to transport 24-foot boards with the truck. So what does that mean? So a total cost of $2,275. I'd say that's probably $2,000 towards decking, the actual decking surface and everything associated with that, and $275 for getting the structure back in shape. If we take the $2,275 and we divide that by the square footage, and this is where it can relate to you, so the square footage being 336, that gives about $6.75 per square foot. So if you want to estimate your costs, measure out your deck, right? Your length and your width, multiply those together, get your square footage or your area of your deck, and then multiply that by $6.75. I'm in the Midwest, depending on where you're at, maybe there's a little bit higher cost, but that will give you something to go off of. This one is a landing pad for a set of steps coming off the deck, but this could serve as a shed pad or maybe a pad for your air conditioner unit. Concrete can be a little intimidating for some of us DIY kind of weekend warriors, but it is an approachable project. You will get a workout. This is something from digging the hole to hauling around 60-pound bags of concrete. You definitely are going to get some exercise. But let's jump in. I'll show you what supplies and tools you're going to need for this job. Quickly running through to give you an idea on what tools you're going to need. First, excavating and getting the hole where you need it. I need this post hole spike, and this pick also comes in very handy to break up the more compacted and clay part of the hole. In addition, just a general purpose shovel, maybe small hand tools to kind of level it out. Wheelbarrow, obviously handy. And then something to tamp down the base later on is going to come in handy. Now, moving on to making your frame and prepping the hole. So I use 2 8-foot 2x4s, and that's because my pad is 48 inches by 45 inches. Super handy little corner clamp there, and you'll see how that's used. A speed square to make sure everything right there is squared up. A little compact nut driver to sink some general purpose deck screws. A torpedo level and then a larger level will come in handy to get everything leveled up. And then the stakes, you can use wood. Here I have some metal stakes, and I use wire mesh in the hole to provide more strength to the concrete. So I just got a 4x8 foot sheet, and you'll see how I use that, and then also made some stands to keep that wire mesh off the ground. And then the actual concrete tools themselves. One, this 2x4 here is used for a screed to strike it off once you have the concrete in the hole. Then I just use general purpose concrete here. This pile of rocks is actually supposed to be there. That serves as the base. You'll see later on in the video what kind of base I was using. Gloves. Don't forget gloves. Concrete can really dry out your skin if you're not careful. So it's always good when handling it to wear gloves. And then I just have an edge and a regular float. You can get a magnesium float, which I would probably prefer. Here I tried just one of the standard wood ones because I don't do these jobs very often. So that's it for the supplies and tools needed, and let's now jump in and make a frame. So I just need to roughly position the frame right now. And the way I went about that is I know that my stairs marked by those stakes are going to be 44 inches wide and then 36 inches is minimum. So we're just going a little bit wider on this one. Then I do not have my stringers made because I want to get this platform landing pad in place prior to deciding exactly how high each of the risers is. But I do know there's going to be 3 steps. Each step being roughly 10 inches. I did measure back from the surface. And I put the stake here roughly where the back side, because I'm going to go out 30 inches, but then the stringer, the bottom of the stringer is going to come back and need to set on the concrete. So this stake here roughly indicates where the outside stringer will land on the concrete pad. Same with that side. So I want that to be positioned obviously inside the concrete pad. So I position those to be in their spot. Again, all this has to be rough at this stage. So then I just put the stakes on the outside, marking plenty of extra space. And then I will start to dig down from this lower side. And I'm going to go down about 9 or 10 inches because I'm going to have 5 inches of concrete. And then I also want about 5 inches, 4 or 5 inches of base underneath the concrete. So that'll be on this lower side. Obviously, I'll have to dig a little bit more on this high side just to get everything pretty much level with a slight slope out for rain so it can drain off properly. Okay, so I got the oversized hole dug, and what I'm going to try to do is make it flush in the back with the concrete and then have a little bit of a lip that's above the grass here, and I'll slope that down. So you got to have a good base under your concrete, and what I'm using, there's the bags of concrete. They didn't have exactly what I wanted at the home improvement shop, but this is a paver base, usually used and compacted under if you're putting pavers down for landscaping. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the hole, and I'm looking for about 4 inches of this, and then pouring overall about 5 inches of concrete. So I'll just go ahead and do a couple different rounds, or what are called lifts, where we're putting in a couple inches and then compacting it down to get up to my overall height I want prior to setting down the forms. I'm using that board off the deck and then a level just to have a level surface all the way out to compare the distance and make sure that I have a complete level surface for the gravel. Then we'll take our form and put that into place, again using that deck board, because this is where you want the top of your form to be exactly at the top of your concrete, so you can use a 2x4 to just screed off that extra concrete as you're looking to get the final surface finished up. Now I'm using some 18-inch stakes here, or spikes, and that's what's actually going to hold this form in the air. Now if you need a reference, you can look right below this video. You'll see the link to our Amazon store, and you can go over and you'll see a reference in the exteriors and deck section. And that's where you'll see the camo screws, you'll see the Spax power lags, you'll see the bow wrench, you'll also see these spikes, so you can get those for your projects if they'll fit your needs. So I'll put 2 of those spikes at each one of these corners, and then once I have those in place, I'll start to get that elevation in the air and sinking screws on the spikes holding the corner, referencing my torpedo level. I'll just work one corner at a time, getting it to the final location that I need. And again, you want to take a little time here because this is going to set you up for success in the rest of the concrete landing project. So ready to start the pour, but I did want to point out that we are using wire mesh to give a little reinforcement. And instead of stands, I bought a 4x8 foot of wire mesh. I only need about half of that, right? So I took the rest of it and I cut these little patterns with about 3 inches extra on each side from the extra 4x4 foot portion that I had. And then I just took and bent over each of these corners to make a stand. And that stand gives me about 2 inches off the paver base, the gravel that I say down here, and that will hold the wire mesh up into the concrete. So instead of buying the kind of expensive stands you can get or pulling it up yourself or whatever you can do, in this case, it worked out pretty well just to use the extra material I had. Don't forget to wet down the gravel before you get started, and then you're ready to go. To give you guys some points of reference, this took me all day. So this was about an 8-hour project, and that's from excavating everything out, getting the base in, getting the frame leveled and set, and then starting the actual pour, floating it, edging it, backfilling it, all cost-wise. So if you guys quoted this out maybe with a local contractor and you have a price point, what this cost me, and it's a 48-inch by 45-inch landing pad, and it's about 5 inches thick in terms of how much material. This cost me $160 to get this in place. That does include about $30 worth of tools. So depending on what tools you have, you might only have about $125 out of pocket for cost. So that gives you a reference point if you have a contractor bidding it out. And then what did I learn? What did I do kind of wrong throughout this? And I will learn and be better in the future, because we do learn the most from mistakes. They don't need to be your mistakes, so hopefully you can learn from some of mine. One, when I had the frame in place, I had a gap at the bottom. Before I started the pour, I should have backfilled and filled in that bottom so the concrete would go right up to that material and have a nice finish at the base. So I would have backfilled that in to fill out the frame at the bottom. And then I did pour this a little drier than I want. So when I was trying to float this off, I couldn't get that nice cream at the top to get a nice smooth finish. I really had to work it, and some of these areas like down here were still drier than I'd want, and I just don't have the experience to know how to build that up. So I would go a little bit more than the prescribed water recommendations on the bag. For me, it was 1.9 liters per bag. I'd probably go to 2.1, 2.2, and pour it a little with a little bit more water in it and pour it wet. So today I'm going to show you step by step how to construct a set of steps like this. It's a pretty easy project, but it can be intimidating, especially when you're cutting your own stringers. So I'll walk you through each of the processes, but to start off with a good foundation, literally it's nice to have a landing pad, or at least knowing how you're going to set your steps in the ground. That way you can get a good measurement and understand your rise needed from the ground surface to the deck to make sure you cut each step accordingly. Two critical dimensions when making the stairs, and that is the rise. What is the distance you need to go from your surface, your landing pad, to the top of the deck boards, and then also your run. So how far of a distance between the rim joist or the deck itself out to your last stair. To get this, you can take a level from your surface. Picture the bubbles in the middle extending out the deck surface, and then take your measurement. And here we have 28.25 as our rise. Now for run, you have to know the deck tread plates and how thick you want to go. Here we're using 2 standard deck boards, which are both 5.5 inches thick. So we want a 1-inch overhang, making each of the stairs width or run 10 inches. So with 1, 2, 3 stairs, we're going to have 30 inches of run. Now in our area, and you should check your code because it does change a little bit area to area, you can't have more than 7 3/4 inch for any one of these steps. And then also each step has to be within 3/8 of an inch. So you can't have an 8-inch step and a 7.5 inch step because you'd be beyond that tolerance. So each of these is going to be 7 1/16 of an inch for each step rise. Now I'm going to take those 2 measurements, and then that's how I'm going to cut these stringers out of a 2x12. Before jumping into that, I want to jump down and show you how we extended the rim joist to make sure the hangers had something to secure into. Okay, I just wanted to show you guys on the back side. In every instance is going to be a little different. So I crawled down here just to show you how I extended out the rim joist so I can hang the stairs from this extension here. What I did is I put some blocking in place. These are actually 2x12s, that's why they're longer than the 2x10s. And so put that blocking in place, 2 of those, and then I butted up the 4x4 post to that sinking 6-inch structural screw, so this monster, through the outside rim joist, because it's 2, it's actually a double rim joist, so 3 inches into the 4x4 post, which is actually 3.5 inches. So I'm going through the double rim joist and then 3 inches into the 3.5 inches of the 4x4 post there. And then coming this way, which you can see in the 4x4 post, I attached it to the blocking here with a 4.5 inch. So that's 1 inch into the 1.5 inches of depth in that block, and that's how it's secured to the blocking. So now we're ready to start marking off and cutting our stringers. I just want to run through what I have here. I'm using a 2x12 pressure treated board, and then a standard framing square. And the key here is to get these small gauges, which will help you mark exactly your run and your rise. 10 inches for my run and 7 1/16 of an inch for my rise. Then when you go along, all you're going to do is mark up and put those gauges on the edge of the board, and then do your marks, and then keep progressing down for each of your steps. What I use to cut them off mainly is just a standard skill saw. I'm using the 24 tooth blade, and for us DIYers, usually it's like 1 blade, we're going to cut everything, but it is nice to have like a 60 tooth plywood blade that's going to make for a nicer cut, less splinters, but it's not going to eat as much material. If you see here, you get some burn marks when you're doing your cuts, your blade is probably worn out. So worth going to get a nice sharp blade and make the job easier. So I'll do most of the cuts with the skill saw, but then I'll do the finish cut with the jigsaw. So the circular saw obviously cuts at an arc, right, because it's circular. So you cannot cut right up to the corner of your stair. So you're going to cut up to the top corner, and then there's going to be material on the bottom side, and the jigsaw is what you're going to use to complete that. So I'm offsetting a little bit here because of that crack in the 2x12. We're just taking that framing square with the gauges set to your rise and run. You're just going to trace the outside for as many steps as you need. Now that top line I'm just going to extend down because that is actually going to be the back surface. Now for the start of the stair, you have to get the bottom surface correct. And instead of 7 1/16 in this instance, I'm using 5 13/16 because I'm going to add 1 1/4 inches of tread on top of that, and that's going to give me my total height. So that's the markings I've made. before we cut the rest of them, what I would do is take your stringer out and just line it up, and then you want to check your measurements. So it is nice to have a little bit of your tread with you, so whatever is going to be serving as that, just making sure everything is lining up to your rise that you wanted. Probably mostly on the top surface and the bottom, because these guys should be cut to the height that you desire for the rise. So now you're just matching everything up. So then if everything looks good, now the next thing is you have a template to go knock out the rest of your stringers. I've assembled the stringers together with the base plate and one of the tread boards. This is so I'll know where to mark each of the stringers so I can install the hangers prior to getting everything finally secured. So now using a hammer drill and also a 1/2 inch bit, you can look down in the description, I'll have a link to exactly the bit I was using. I'm going to make 2 holes here on the base plate, and that is to fit some anchors which will be holding everything secure to the landing pad. So I want to give you a little update video, or maybe just introduce you to the first time, a project where I kind of completely redid my deck. When I purchased my house 3 years ago, it had a huge deck that was about 340 square foot, but it was really beat up. So through a course of 3 different videos, I tore off the existing decking, tore off some planter boxes, tore off some stairs, tore off the seating, and got back to the structure of the deck. And then in the second video, I actually secured up that structure, changed out some of those joists, changed out the rim joists, and actually put 1 support post in and did a little bit of concrete work. Then in the last video, I went through with the camo fastening system and I laid down new pressure treated deck boards. Now there's some other adjacent videos like laying down a landing pad for some stairs and also building stringers and a staircase to this deck. All those go into this deck, and it's been about 2 years since that project's finished. Now this project at the time cost me about $2,300, and today in 2022, May 2022, the material cost would be much higher, at least 2 times, probably more like 3 times the cost. So even if you're doing it yourself, a deck of this size, 340 square foot, probably going to be in the $5,000 to $6,000 range for just material cost. But since I am a complete DIYer when it comes to decking, I think it is good to show after a few years how does this thing look. Is it still looking okay? Is it holding up? And maybe a few of those lessons learned. Just in case you're going to take on this project yourself, you can take all those videos as reference and then also hopefully learn for a few things that I would do differently now. So here's the deck, and actually one thing I did today is I cut the end boards again because they were shrinking up quite a bit over the first 2 years. Now that along the length is the least surprising. It's not that surprising. You can see the gaps here. The gaps have formed, and gaps will vary, let's say from 3/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. And all these boards were set with 0 gaps when I first installed them. I installed these using the camo fastening system. So you just put that right on your joist. Then you take your screws and you drop them in the 2 holes. And then you take your impact driver and sink both those. And then that is going to conceal your fasteners. You can see the little fastener holes here. It works really well. It's held the boards down except for this one guy. This guy has really curled up a bit over the years, and it's been where I had to drill, countersink, and then set 4 deck screws to really try to hold it down. Other than that, everything's behaved fairly well. And one of the embarrassing things, which you might have already noticed, is I, in 2 years, have still not sealed the deck. So that will be done, and I'll at least post a picture on the community tab proving I finally sealed it. Also, you might notice there's no seams. These were 24-foot long boards. They were huge. So when you get boards of that length, you're gonna have imperfections because they deliver them to your house and you're only gonna get so many extras. So I tried filling in some of the knots and some of the defects in these boards with some Bondo wood filler. It worked okay, but I think once I seal the deck, those are really gonna stand out and not really look that great. One other error when I was adding up all those boards is it left me where I didn't have an overhang on the end of my deck. 0 overhang, which is definitely not ideal. Now, a project that I have coming up this week is actually to add a railing. So we'll do a railing on this side, obviously opening for the stairs, railing all the way around this edge, and then leaving the stairs that run the length here wide open. So since the project, this has been another addition. We put in a concrete patio, tore out all those bricks, which were the old patio there. And just for your reference, this patio is about 30 foot long and about 14 foot wide, and it cost me about $5,000 to put in last year. I did not do it. That was hired out. So just in case that's something you guys are looking to do. So overall, 2 years later, especially since I have not put down the Thompson water sealer, I mean, the deck's holding up pretty good. I need to get the water sealer on or the boards will really start to deteriorate and probably have already kind of impacted their life. The little concrete pad that I poured and made a video of, this was my complete amateur job pouring concrete, has held up well. You can tell the brush finish is not quite professional grade, but we will be doing landscaping this week. So mulch going all the way around this and starting to get the backyard all together. So what would I do differently, let's say, on my next attempt? I take a little bit more time calculating out how many boards I'll need to make sure I have that overhang. I should have ripped a board down in half at the start, so then I would have the board width I needed to get it secured to the structure of the deck, but then have that nice 1-inch overhang. I'm not sure the decision of 24-foot boards, which I obviously had to have delivered, so I only had so many extra boards which I could choose from. So that meant some of the boards that I was putting down had larger knots and larger defects than I would really want to put down on the deck. So if I would have went with more like a 12-foot board and kind of managed to those seams, I probably would have had a little better selection and a little better wood going on the surface. I definitely should have sealed the deck within about 1 or 2 months of putting down the deck boards and sealed every year since. So I've actually missed 2 cycles now, and it's well overdue. So it's well overdue for a nice cleaning with a pressure washer and a coat of Thompson's water seal. One thing I will say, with all the movement and shrinkage of the boards, the camo fastening system, so these screws and then that handle that you put down where it's helping you drive at the right angle through the boards to really conceal the fasteners, that was a very good decision, and that's held up really, really well, especially for all that movement and shrinkage in the boards. it's held the vast majority of those boards down really well. And I think the fastening system is kind of passed with flying colors. But I did actually finally get the Thompson's water seal on. It was last season, and you can see it's aging a little bit, so I'm going to need to put another coating on here as we're just starting to get into spring. And also the railings. So this was something I didn't document for you guys, but the railing I did put on with the 4x4 post, and this was 36 inches high, which is code in my area. Now I didn't actually need to put a railing on because if the deck is less than 30 inches off the ground, you do not need a handrail according to code, but check your own building codes for decks in your area. But I'll give you a little bit more details on the railing and how we set it up. So with the railing, what I went with is just pressure treated 4x4 posts, but those actually go down past the deck boards. So you can see they're actually going past the deck boards, and they're actually tied into the structure with carriage bolts going through. So the 4x4 posts on the deck are very secure. Now be careful, some people just want to put the railing on top of your deck boards and it looks good, but the structure just simply isn't there. Then we had 2x4s on the top and bottom and capped that off with the black spindles here and black caps to kind of give it a modern look. Now the 2x4s are mounted to the 4x4 post with these little black brackets. And I'll put that link to this hardware in our Amazon store under that exteriors and decks section for your reference, along with all the other tools. So if I roll all the cost up through this entire deck building series, we're looking at about $4,000 plus or minus a couple $100 for materials. But that's going to depend on where lumber prices are. So when I did the 2-year recap, lumber prices were super high. That's why I said the lumber material cost would be 2 or 3 times what we did originally when the lumber prices were low. So your project cost is heavily going to be dependent on where lumber prices are at when you're taking on that project. Now let me know if you guys have any feedback or questions in the comment section below the video, or you can go over to everydayhomerepairs.com, and we do have a question and answer forum that we just started up. If you post a question there with some of your own pictures, I guarantee I'll be in there helping you one-on-one get through that project. Now if you want to take on another fairly large DIY project, but bang for the buck is going to be awesome for your home, check out this complete series on the DIY bathroom remodel I did at one of our rental properties. So thanks for joining me on this video, and we'll catch you on that next one. Take care.